Weeks later, the United States attacked Afghanistan at the head of an international coalition. After removing the Taliban from power, a temporary government was put in place. It was headed by Hamid Karzai, an Afghan living in America who had previously worked as a consultant for Unocal. In the meantime, the world media spread the mythology of the rebel hidden in highly sophisticated self-powered caves with air conditioning and ammunition stacks. But in reality, bin Laden was nowhere to be found. Instead of increasing the pressure, 3 months later, President Bush shocked the world by suddenly announcing that bin Laden had become irrelevant.
And, again, I don't know where he is. I repeat what I said. I truly am not that concerned about him.
In the meantime, the deal between Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, and Pakistan for the pipeline to the Indian Ocean had been signed, exactly at the conditions posed by Unocal 4 years before.
If you map the proposed pipeline route across to Afghanistan, and you look at our bases, matches perfectly. Our bases are there to solve a problem that Taliban could not solve. Taliban couldn't provide security in that part of Afghanistan. Well, now that's where our bases are.
One of the ways that give the oil companies tremendous clout is the recognition that their interests and the interests of the nation are pretty much the same. And of course, this is justified by claiming that since oil is now the basic energy resource, this is argued as basic national security.
As we know, the final goal for the neocons had always been Iraq, which had nothing to do with Islamic terrorism. For this reason, the Bush administration has needed to produce a major effort to propagate the idea that a connection between Saddam Hussein and the September 11 attacks in fact existed.
General Clark has said publicly that on 9/11, as American couples were holding hands and jumping to their death, the White House called him and said, "Pin it on Iraq." They weren't thinking about the Americans dying. They weren't thinking about the people who were committing suicide in order to escape the flames. They were thinking about 9/11 not as an attack, but as a gift.
The president dragged me into a room with a couple of other people, shut the door, and said, "I want you to find whether Iraq did this." That George Bush wanted me to come back with a report that said, Iraq did this.
Secretary of the Treasury Paul O'Neill decided to leave the administration when he became aware of their true intents in the Middle East.
That questions such as why Saddam and why now were never asked. It's all about finding a way to do it. That was the tone of it. The president saying, "Go find me a way to do this."
From the very beginning, there was a conviction that Saddam Hussein was a bad person and that he needed to go.
He says that going after Saddam Hussein was topic A 10 days after the inauguration, 8 months before September 11th.
The problem for the Bush administration is that plans that already existed for regime change in Iraq had to be justified. They couldn't just go in without public support. The public support was created by connecting Saddam Hussein to those fears of terrorism. The fear generated by 9/11, the fear of terrorist networks, has to be transferred to Iraq. That is, the American people have to learn to be as afraid of Saddam Hussein as they are of Osama bin Laden.
If they'd come to the American people and said, look, we want to engage in a war of conquest, in effect, to reestablish the balance politically in the Middle East, I don't think people would have gone along with it.
The president basically has let the public believe a lie, which is that Iraq played a role in 9/11, which is nonsense.
I've never believed that from the very beginning. Why would Saddam Hussein risk being involved with al-Qaeda? He has no record of trusting terrorist groups.
Here's this guy, I was on TV with him. He said this in public. That bastard Saddam Hussein was responsible for September 11th. when he knew very well that there was no basis for this story.
Saddam Hussein.
Saddam Hussein.
Saddam Hussein.
Saddam Hussein.
Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein.
Saddam
Hussein. Iraq continues to flaunt its hostility toward America and to support terror. The Iraqi regime has plotted to develop anthrax and nerve gas and nuclear weapons for over a decade. This is a regime that has something to hide from the civilized world.
His regime has the design for a nuclear weapon, was working
busy
on
in terms of the actual weapons that they've been producing. They've been busy in terms of expanding.
Recently was discovered seeking significant quantities of uranium from Africa.
Institutional capability to produce additional weapons.
Iraq has weapons of mass destruction.
They've been busy in terms of expanding their capability.
They have weapons of mass destruction. Any country on the face
of those weapons, year after year after year,
knows that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction.
Of purpose, that they're purposeful about what they're doing.
C'est ça qui est inquiétant, de voir avec quelle facilité.
The disturbing thing is to see how well-organized and repetitive propaganda, driving the point home into people's minds, can be so effective.
We cannot wait for the final proof, the smoking gun, that could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
How much longer are we willing to put up with Iraq's noncompliance before we, as a council, we as the United Nations say, enough.
Come out! Open the door! Open the door! Get your hands up and come outside! Come outside! Everybody in the house needs to come outside!
From the beginning, it was clear that the Iraqi invasion would be about anything but bringing a true democracy in that country.
We just pulled out here yesterday just to come out and help protect the oil line.
In a tank?
In a tank.
Prize thief among the high Nazis was Hermann Goering, who looted museums and private...
At the end of World War II, the American soldiers recovered from the residence of Hermann Goering a vast collection of art pieces the Nazi leader had been removing from the museums of the conquered cities.
Not content with robbing people of their freedom and their lives, the Nazis tried to make off with their symbols of culture.
In 2003, it was the Iraqis who showed the world the remnants of their immense artistic heritage, which had been destroyed or stolen by the Americans. At a time when humanitarian groups were not allowed in the destroyed cities yet, it appears that art dealers and merchants with a close relationship to the Pentagon had free access to and from the country. The most precious and rare artifacts dating back to the Sumerian civilization were either destroyed or stolen. Entire libraries from all branches of knowledge were emptied in a matter of days.
Coming to steal the most precious books we have here. They are specialists. They know the value of these books.
And whatever was not stolen was burnt and turned to ashes by special chemical components. It was as if someone wanted to prevent a future rebirth of the nation by depriving the new generations from their country's immense cultural heritage. Some of the most famous archaeological sites were also destroyed with no apparent reason. In the meantime, the Bush administration convinced Congress to approve the extraordinary printing of $20 billion in cash to be used for the reconstruction of Iraq.
We will help them to restore basic services, such as electricity and water, and to build new schools, roads, and medical clinics.
360 tons of $100 bills were physically transported to Iraq in single packages worth a few $1 million each. As soon as they arrived, the packages were stacked in the basement of Saddam's former residence.